not anything. Right. Yeah. I went. Exactly.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Oh. Good evening, everybody. That worked. Thank you all for braving this terrible weather. Not quite as terrible as I thought it was going to be coming down today. So I want to introduce myself. My name is Wiley Cash. I'm the Executive Director of Literary Arts here at UNC Asheville. I do a little teaching, a little program building, I work in the community. I'm very fortunate to do that. This feels a little echo. My turn. Feels like a lot of me. I've had enough of me. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to share a couple of events that we have coming up. On Wednesday, March 19th, we're going to be having another Look Homeward Angel event in this very room. Behind the scenes at Dixieland. Dixieland was immortalized in Look Homeward Angel. It is the house in downtown Asheville. That talk is going to be given by Kayla C., who is the site director at the Thomas Wolfe Memorial. So come hear from Kayla about what a day is like in the life of Dixieland and what goes on. We have a volunteer tonight, Chris. She likes to drink and hide out in the closets upstairs. So we'll cover that as well. And then on Wednesday, April 23rd, I'll be giving a craft talk about some of my favorite excerpts of Look Homeward. I'm calling that How the Magic Works, breaking down the craft element. And when I say craft, what I mean is literally breaking down in almost physical, concrete terms how scenes work, how characters are built. Magic is actually just a way of distracting us. And that's what really good writers do, distract us and get us to believe in what. So I'll talk about how that works in the novel. Just really quickly, originally the spring selection was going to be a nonfiction book called We Are Each Other's Gardens. We Are Each Other's Harvest, forgive me, by a writer named Natalie Bazile. It's on Black farming, Black land legacy. Natalie is the author of that book. She's also author of Sugar, that was turned into a television show on the network. Natalie was going to be our Wilma Dykeman writer in residence this spring, and so it was great to have her here. Hurricane Helene had other plans with the Wilma Dykeman House, and so Natalie was not able to join us. And so I thought, what is a book that I can choose that will get folks excited, especially in a time I want folks excited about Asheville and Western North? And Look Homeward Angel was the logical choice. I met Thomas Wolfe and Look Homeward Angel. I went to school here undergrad, 96 to 2000. I didn't meet Thomas Wolfe and Look Homeward Angel just before I left. I bought the book at the Memorial one summer day in the summer of 2000 and took it to Louisiana, where I read Look while I was desperately missing Western North Carolina, and it was my way back. A couple of years later, I was at a conference in Baton Rouge talking to a very cute graduate student. I forgot where she was going to school, but I found out that she liked Thomas Wolfe. I said, "Oh, you like Thomas Wolfe? I like Thomas Wolfe. As a matter of fact, I am currently working on a paper about the American Adam at work in The Lost Boy," or whatever it was. She was like, "Oh, that sounds fascinating." I'm sure she was thinking, what are you hitting on? We were in the buffet line at this literary conference, and this man in front of me turned around and he said, "That sounds really interesting. My name is Joseph Flora. I teach at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm president of the Thomas Wolfe Society. You should submit your paper to our student contest, and if you win, you'll get a grant to go to the Widener Library at Harvard." So I did, and I won. And I went to Widener Library where 2 tons of Thomas Wolfe's material are stored. And I've been there twice since then. Longtime member of the Thomas Wolfe Society. That's what happens. You think you're like getting a date and you end up hanging out with Joseph Flora and a bunch of stuffy academics. But I want to say very quickly that on one of my trips to the Widener Library, I It's very interesting. You request the material and you send a card down and they lower it down into like the bowels of the library, and then the material you requested comes up on it in like manila folders. And I can't remember what I had requested, but in one of the folders was a handwritten map that Thomas Wolfe had made of town Asheville. And on this map, he had crossed out Hearron and wrote what he was going to call it. Crossed out Walnut Street. And I remember holding that and thinking, I knew he had done it. Everybody knew. But it felt like I was holding the Rosetta Stone. It felt like a very magical moment. And so tonight, our lecturer, Tom Hearron, is going to take us inside that map that I held all those years ago and into the city that Thomas Wolfe shared with so many. Tom, who's with us tonight, is the president of the Thomas Wolfe Memorial Advisory Committee. He's a well-published author and educator, and he has taught extensively at universities around the country, UNC Asheville, right here in the Reuters Center. So, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. I'm originally from Dallas, but went to school in Rice because I wanted to be. Remember Sputnik and how we had to band together? Things happened in my freshman year. One, I took calculus. That was the only course where I did not have the faintest idea. Students around me were saying, he's brilliant. The instructor was back to his old history. Raised with one hand as he wrote with. And I had no idea what he was doing. Then I read Thomas Wolfe, Look Homeward. I found this is a guy who spent most of his. So it gave me some hope, so I switched to where I said, let's talk. Thomas Wolfe is well known, but not as well known as he ought to be. But let's start. Give him a couple of monuments. Yeah. But I'm a believer in the value-added model of education. You know, you have to assess your grades. One of the things I've noticed is that often the students who learn the most in a class get a lower grade than someone who didn't learn quite as much, because the ones who didn't learn a lot were already farther in. So I first decided, well, why don't we do a CAT scan, MRI of their brain at the beginning of the term, and then do another one at the end of the term. And I took this idea to my dean. Apparently there's privacy and education laws or something that wouldn't let me do that. So I'm trying to find other ways to assess. So let's see how much you already know. True, kind of true, or false. Tom Wolfe had a close-knit, loving family. No. His father was a boy. He bumped into some Robert Lee's troops at the farmhouse. Water. Yeah. Did he carve the angels? Did not. Lacked the manual dexterity to carve an angel. He could do lambs. He could do praying hands. And if you go to Riverside Cemetery, if it ever opens, then you can see some of his work there. Much lacked the finesse of an angel. I was born in poverty but died rich. First part of that's true. Second part of it isn't. She died in poverty. She invested in real estate. The real estate crashed. She couldn't even make the home, which was mortgage. And so died in Boston. She was tough. She did outlive all these people. Wolfe originally wanted to be a dramatist. He wanted to write plays. Came to a novelist and the inspiration of a very wonderful woman I'll talk about later, named Aline Bernstein. True? Not true. I'll tell you what's true later. Not exactly true. Yeah, when he came home from college after his first year, he fell in love with a boarder who was 7 years older than he was. And the really one love of his life was a married woman 19 years older. Freudians would say he's searching for a mother. Kind of true. I'll tell you about that later. Well, let's go to the basics. First, when I teach creative writing, the first piece of advice I give my students is write what you know. This is what Thomas Wolfe knew. Growing up in this drafty, rambling, ramshackle place, surrounded by strangers, and feeling that there is no love in his life, led him to write this toward the end of his life. Sure. The whole conviction of my life now rests upon the belief that loneliness, far from being a rare and curious phenomenon, peculiar to myself and to a few other solitary men, is the central and inevitable fact of human existence. A piece published as God's Lonely Man. This is his father, Yankee, came from a little town outside of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. His father wanted to be an actor. He fell in love with the plays of William Shakespeare, memorized whole passages. But his father said, there's no money in acting. I hear that's changed since then. So he apprenticed him to be a stonecutter, sent him to Baltimore to learn the art of stone. From Baltimore, he was sent to Raleigh to work on a prison there. In Raleigh, he met the woman who was the love of his life, Cynthia. She was the daughter of the boarding house keeper where he stayed. They married, they were happy. She caught tuberculosis. Did you know that tuberculosis was the leading cause of death among adults in 1900? Remained so until antibiotics were taken care of it. He brought her to Asheville because Asheville was famous for its clean air, clean water. It was called chemotherapy. I believe that high altitude suppressed the growth of the TB. It turns out that's true. I once, in one of my tours at the Wolfe House, met a gentleman who was a pulmonary physician. He said, yes, it is true, but you need to be at about 13,000 feet or higher. Asheville didn't work so well. This is his mother. She was born in a little town, on a farm outside the little town of Swannanoa. She came to Asheville and worked as a school teacher. She was also a bookseller. W.O.'s wife died after 2 years in Asheville. The cure didn't work, so he built a big house for her, where the YMCA now sits. He'd heard there was this new guy in town who had a lot of money. His wife has just died. Oh. He's a Yankee. He likes to read. So she visited him, sold him books, they talked, they chatted, they went for walks, they had lunch together. One day he gave what was probably the least romantic proposition you'll ever hear. He said, "How old are you?" She said, "I'm 25, Mr. Wolfe." "You're an old maid then. You're too old to get married. I need someone. I can't get about my house. What do you say?" And on that basis began what was probably the worst marriage in history. Totally ill-matched. He drank, she didn't. He spent, she saved. When he built a fire, he threw oak logs into the fireplace and doused them with kerosene. She would take pieces of paper and little totally mismatched. They were married in 1885. This photo was from a few years later, same year that Tom was born, in fact. This picture of him before the age of 9. His hair was kind of long. Julia refused to cut his hair because that would mean he was no longer a boy. Wanted to keep him a child as long as she could. This is what the family looked like. And this is the original family residence on what's now Woodfin Street. Everybody there except Tom because he hasn't been born yet. W.O.'s shop was on Pack Square. About a 2-block walk from where he lived. And this is a photo of him leaning against the pillar at his shop. And if you look closely in the background, you can see the wings of some of the angels he had there displayed. This is a fascinating photo. Someone recently walked into the special collections at Buncombe Library and said, "Here's some pictures you might be interested in," and walked out. We're pretty sure this is a photo that had never been seen before of Thomas Wolfe's brothers and sisters. They're photographed right in front of the shop where he worked. Music how things continue to turn up. Let's look at his life highlights. Born here, 1900. In 1904, his mother didn't want to be dependent upon her husband for income. She wanted to be independent, have an independent source of wealth. So she'd heard that you could make money off of a boarding house. Boarding houses are a phenomenon we just don't have anymore. Closest we've got is B&B. But for a boarding house, you stayed there, you got 2 meals a day and a place to sleep. It was used by people who couldn't afford anywhere else. And one of our historical interpreters at the Wolfe Memorial showed me that at the time when she bought this, 1904, the average rent was twice what the average salary was. So that's kind of talk about affordable housing. So a lot of locals lived here, but also Asheville, as I mentioned, was a center for treatment of tuberculosis. So people who come with their families couldn't stay with them in the sanitariums, so they had to have someplace to stay. So she rented this house. She had a notion she was going to buy a place in Asheville, but this was a smart businesswoman. She said, "I want to see if I can make money off of it." So for the World's Fair in 1904, she rented a house. Found out she could make money out of it. But her son Grover died of typhoid. The city's water supply was tainted. Typhoid city that year. This is what he looked like. 8 years older than Tom. She was devastated. Later in life, she told an interviewer who was working on a memoir about her, "Of all my children, Grover is the only one I loved. The others I just put up with." And this is what Wolfe has to say about his death. "The death of Grover gave Eliza the most terrible wound of her life. Her flesh seemed to turn rotten when she thought of the distant city and fair. With her desperate sadness, she insisted herself within her house. But the dark, lost face gleamed like a sudden and impalpable fawn within the thickets of memory. She thought of the mark on his brown neck and wept." For about 2 years, she was virtually in a coma. She just stumbled through life. She pulled herself together, though, and she said, "I have resolved I will never love anyone ever again. It hurts too much. I'm going to devote my life to getting rich." She didn't think she was going to get rich off of her husband. As someone who was considerably older than he was and afflicted by arthritis, he wasn't able to do the quantity of work that he previously had been able to do. So she saw the income dropping. And as Wolfe put it, but Eliza was not content with W.O.'s trade. There was no money in death. People, she thought, died too slowly. So she decided she would go out on her own and be able to support herself. To do this, she bought what is now the Thomas Wolfe Memorial boarding house at 48 Spruce Street. Only Tom lived there. The other children and W.O., his father, stayed at the family house. He called it the old Kentucky home. In Look Homeward, it was called Dixieland. Julia had a way of anticipating growth. Eliza saw Altamont not as so many hills built as people. She saw it in the pattern of a gigantic blueprint. She knew the history of every piece of valuable property. Who bought it? Who sold it? Who owned it in 1893 and what it was now worth? She judged distance critically, saw at once where the beaten route to the important center was stupidly circuitous, and looking in a straight line through houses and lots, she said, "There'll be a street through here someday." She would buy property along where she believed the street would come. W.O. wanted nothing to do with it. At that time, Julia could not buy property as a married woman without her husband's consent. He said, "I will consent, but it is yours. I live there, I will not work there, my children will not live there, then I want Tom. Tom will live there." His notion was this: "I never want to own another piece of property as long as I live," said Gant. "It's a curse and a care, and the tax collector gets all you have in the end." Which Wolfe adds, "The residence of anyone under his roof, not of his blood and bones, sowed the air about with menace, breached his castle walls, to earn the one's living by accepting the contempt, the scorn, and the money of what he called cheap boarders, was an almost unendurable ignominy." Julia prided herself on running the cheapest boarding house in Asheville. Charged $1 a day for 2 meals and a spot to sleep. Other boarding houses charged $1.50. If you wanted to stay at an uptown place like the Battery Park or the Grove Park, you had to pay, can you believe this, $5 a night with no meals provided. He had no room of his own. He had no bed of his own. He kept a little bedroll tucked under the stairs, and wherever the boarders were not sleeping, That's where he would sleep. Wolfe puts it like this in Look Homeward, Angel. Before he was 8, Eugene gained another roof and lost forever the tumultuous, unhappy, warm center of his home. He had from day to day no clear idea where the day's food, shelter, lodging was to come from. He wrote, I have 2 houses, 2 roofs, but I have no home. And we see a lot of that when we read Wolfe. I mean, look at the titles, Look Homeward, Angel. You can't go home again. In his work, you feel this desire of having a place where you belong, a place where you can live your life. The key symbol in the book is the angel on the porch of his father, W. Wolfe. This is a replica of it in front of the Art Museum now. For 6 years it stood on the porch, weathering in all the wind and the rain. It was now brown and fly-specked, but it came from Verona and Italy, and it held a stone lily delicately in one hand. We're pretty sure this angel is actually in a cemetery in Hendersonville, wife of a Methodist minister. In a short story that Wolfe published, excerpted from Look Homeward, The Angel on the Porch, it's bought by a madam of a house of prostitution for one of her daughters. And here's a picture of it. It held a stone really delicately in one hand. The other hand was lifted in benediction. It was poised clumsily upon the ball of one pathetic foot. That's a hard word to say. How many words in English start with 4 consonants? Pathetic foot. And its stupid white face wore the look of some soft stone idiocy. The family agreed to send Tom to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He wanted to go to Virginia, but his father said, no, you're going to Chapel Hill, you're going to study law, you're going to become a senator, maybe president. He majored in English. But the family were willing to pay the $100 a year it costs to send a child to Chapel Hill. I understand it costs somewhat more than that now. And as he was leaving, he said this to his mother, by God, I shall spend the rest of my life getting my heart back, healing and forgetting every scar you put upon me when I was a child. The first move I ever made after the cradle was to crawl for the door. And every move I've made since has been an effort to escape. He loved the university. For the first time, he found people that were interested in books and ideas. He studied playwriting under the famous Frederick Cook. This is him in the lead role of a play he wrote at Chapel Hill called The Return of Buck Gavin. This was quite a successful playwriting enterprise. Cook said, write from your experience, write about your own people. You don't have to write about New Yorkers. You don't have to write about people from Chicago. Write what happens to the people you know. And so some of his graduates wrote The Lost Colony. Herman Hunter wrote 2, Under These Hills, still performed in Cherokee today, and Hearron in the West, still performed in Boone today. Spanish influenza. We now know it began in a military base in Kansas, so it should be called Kansas influenza. Seems a flock of migratory birds flew over and defecated into the water supply, and it transmitted from birds to people. Sort of a bird flu. Aren't you glad we don't have to worry about that sort of thing anymore? It was the deadliest pandemic since the bubonic plague. 1/3 of the world's population were infected. 50 million died. COVID, just an amateur, gosh. I mean, not even trying. And the odd thing about it is that it was a strain that, unlike most forms of influenza, they're deadly to the very old and the very young. This one concentrated on killing people in their 20s and their 30s. More U.S. soldiers died of flu than died of war wounds. And again, this pulmonary physician I was telling you about, I asked him about that. I said, why? He said, we don't know. We have isolated the DNA. We've exhumed bodies of soldiers who died for it and found traces of the DNA of this. And it is unlike anything we have today. We have no defense. But what happened to it, I asked him. He said, it is not in the interest of a pathogen to kill its host. So it mutated into a form that was less lethal, but easier to spread. This started to sound familiar. Upshot of it is, Tom's favorite brother, Benjamin Harrison, the twin of Grover, full name Grover Cleveland, on it. He and Tom were the closest in the family because they were both weird. Probably we'd say today they were on the spectrum, but they were very shy and very difficult to be with in public. Ben would tell Tom, we should get out of this town. It's become a town of real estate speculators and greedy real estate agents. We're designed for better things. He caught it. Ben, Tom was called home from Chapel Hill with the news that Ben has pneumonia. And the doctor treating him said, not all the king's horses, not all the doctors and nurses in the world can help him now. My dear girl, he said, he's drowning. Drowning. I'm going to let you read this. I cannot read this aloud without cracking up. This is how the most powerful scene in Look Homeward Angel ends, the death of Ben. Ben drew upon the air in a long and powerful respiration, his gray eyes opened. Let's give it a try, Tom. Filled with a terrible vision of all life in the one moment, he seemed to rise forward modestly from his pillows without support. A flame, a light, a glory, joined at length in death to the dark spirit who had brooded upon each footsteps of his lonely adventure on earth, and casting the fierce sword of his glance with utter and final comprehension upon the room, he passed instantly, scornful and unafraid, as he had lived, into the shades of death. He refused to let his mother into the room with him. He said, dying is bad enough without having her watching me do it. He went into a coma. He did slip in to hold his hands, but suddenly he woke, sat up, pointed at Tom and said, get out of here this time, we'll kill you. Got out. He did graduate school at Harvard, continuing his dream of being a playwright. That's what he studied. He moved to New York, trying to get his plays produced, but he couldn't find a taker. And here's why. His plays were like his novels. His play, Welcome to Our City, has 55 characters, 32 speaking roles. It has 9 scene changes, one of which is for a half a page of text. You're thinking New York labor, you're thinking stagehands, you're thinking how much this is going to cost. And it ran 4.5 hours. He traveled to Europe, and this was a transformative moment in his life. He met this woman, Lean Bernstein, She was in the theater business. She was a Tony-nominated set designer. Had a 4-year affair with her. She supported him. She gave him a place to live. She put food on his table. She cooked for him. And this is his description of meeting her on the boat. He turned and saw her then, and so finding her was lost. And so losing self was found, and so seeing her saw for a fleeting moment only the pleasant image of the woman that perhaps she was, and that life saw. He never knew. He only knew that from that moment his spirit was impaled upon the knife of love. Another key figure in his life was Maxwell Perkins, junior editor at Scribner's. Perkins is perhaps the most significant figure in 20th century American fiction. He discovered F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, and Thomas Wolfe, all within a period of about 4 years. At the time, these were the hot authors for Scribner's. Ever popular Henry James and Edith Wharton. It was a very conservative, stodgy publishing house. He discovered Fitzgerald and Hemingway. When he took Fitzgerald's manuscript, This Side of Paradise, all the other editors said, no, nobody wants to read this. Perkins says, let's give it a try. It was the best-selling book they'd ever published. It sold out faster than they could print it. He didn't use this term, but he was trying to reach a different demographic, discovering that older people have a nasty way of stopping to read because they're dead. You need to tap into the young people. That's what Fitzgerald did. He also helped these folks with their titles. Ever heard of these books? Makes you want to rush out and buy it, doesn't it? How about This Side of Paradise? How about this? Our Type, The Drunkard's Holiday, The Malarkey Case, The World's Fair. These are all Fitzgerald's. Tender as the night. The Asheville and Millionaires, Trimalchio and West Egg, Gold-Hatted Gatsby, oh, we're getting close. The High Bouncing Lover, The Great Gatsby. All these were Perkins' suggestions. The original title of Wolfe's novel was The Building of a Wall. Then Alone, Alone. And Oh Lost became Look Homeward, Angel, from the quote from John Milton's Lycidas. Look homeward, angel, now and melt with truth, and O ye dolphins, waft the hapless youth. Perkins cut 65,000 words from the novel. The original manuscript was 330,000 words long. War and Peace is 150,000. Perkins basically said, you got 2 books here, now let's work on one. Began from his birth and take him to going to college. What does it mean to cut 65,000 words? Yeah. Critical commercial success, but the town hated it. He got death threats. He got letters, anonymous letters saying, I will kill you if you come to Asheville. Because people rushed out to buy it. I mean, this local boy's written a book, and they loved it. They recognized what he was writing about. Oh, that's old Sam, yeah, that old stingy little SOB. Oh, yes, that's Louisa, that little slut. Oh, my God, this is me. Preachers fulminated against it, said, do not buy this book, it's pornography, it insults the South. The library refused to stock it. He wanted to come back, but couldn't for years. But Wiley always felt so strong the magnetic pull of home. This little town and the immortal hills around it was not the only home you had on earth. He did not know. All that he knew was that the years flew by like water, and that one day men come home. Published of Time in the River. And a literary critic named Bernard DeVoto, in an essay called Genius is Not Enough, slammed Wolfe and said it's Perkins that made this book. Perkins wrote this book. This annoyed Wolfe mightily, so he left Scribner's. 1938, he did come to Asheville. He wrote a piece about it called The Return. But by this time, things had cooled. He joked, the only people mad at me now are the ones I didn't put in my book. So he tried to write, people followed him like he was like groupies, like a superstar. So he had to go back to New York. Finished an immense crate of manuscripts, and this is it. This is typescripts. This is what he dropped on his editor's desk and said, this is my new book. There was this new organization called the American Automobile Association that was promoting automobiles. And they wanted to demonstrate to the public that you could tour the Western National Parks by automobile. So they hired Tom to write articles about it, they hired a photographer to take pictures, and they hired a mechanic to take care of the car. And they covered, let's follow it on the map. It started at Crater Lake, went down through Yosemite, Sequoia, Joshua Tree, crossed the Grand Canyon, up to Zion and Bryce Canyon, over into Wyoming, let's do Grand Teton and Yellowstone, let's go up to Glacier, and let's go back to Mount Rainier in Washington. 4,632 miles in 13 days. And if you question this, so did I. But one of our conservators says, here's his journals, here's his notes. He dated every day. This is where they were every day. Sometimes they would get in at 4 in the morning and leave at 6 in the morning, but they did it. Can you imagine that on roads that really weren't paved at that time? Astonishing. What it wore him out. In Seattle, he was caught pneumonia, transported to Johns Hopkins because they could fix the pneumonia, but he complained about these terrible, terrible headaches. And the doctors in Seattle were baffled, so they sent him to the premier medical institution in the United States. The doctors suspected, so they did a chest x-ray. He said, why are you doing a chest x-ray? My problem's in my head. They found on his lung a little fuzzy patch. He'd had tuberculosis while in college. Before antibiotics, you could not cure tuberculosis. What your body did was formed a wall of scar tissue. Encysting it is the term that the doctors told me about used. He'd had TB, his body had walled it off, but the pneumonia had broken it loose, it got into his blood and transmitted to his brain. Doctors opened his skull, hoping that it was limited. Fluid shot 3 feet into the air. They sewed him back up. He said it's hopeless. He's buried now at Riverside Cemetery, along with his whole family, including the love of W.O.'s wife, Cynthia. Julia consented to having her buried in the cemetery, but said she's going to be buried behind me. She's not going to be in front of me. Out of that immense pile of manuscripts, his editor carved 2 books, collection of short novels, collection of plays, collection of short stories, this remarkable amount of work. When Sinclair Lewis accepted the Nobel Prize for Literature, he said, Tom Wolfe should be here, not me. He's the greatest writer of our generation. William Faulkner was asked, who's the greatest American novelist? He said, I'm number 2. Tom Wolfe is number 1. He may not have succeeded, but he tried more, he failed more, but he was the best one we've ever had. He has this passage, and you can't go home again. Something has spoken to me in the night and told me I shall die, I know not where, saying, death is to lose the earth you know for greater knowing, to lose the life you have for greater life, to leave the friends you love for greater loving, to find a land more kind than home, a land more kind than home. Wouldn't that be a great title for a novel?
Actually, no.
More kind than home, more large than earth. And here's his obituary. We're happy to answer questions. Why do we may need a second mic? I see a couple of hands.
What is known about how he started writing novels when he was first writing plays?
Oh, I am so glad you asked that. Dang, I didn't talk about that. It was Elaine Bernstein, the love of his life, who said, I've got in Broadway, and I'll tell you, you're not going to get your plays produced. Every night you tell me these stories about your childhood. Why don't you write that down? Write what you know. Write about your life. And she supported him while he did it. He was the impetus behind his becoming a fiction writer. Yeah, thanks for asking. One up here, one up here.
I want to know what happened to mean old mom.
What happened to mean old mom? Well, she continued to be mean and she got old. I mentioned her mania for real estate. She would take, in the wintertime, train trips to Florida, hire someone to look after the boarding house, and to take Tom with her until he got too big to look like he was under 8 years old to get the half fare, so she stopped taking him then. She would go to Florida to buy real estate. And people said, you're crazy. Florida is not fit for human habitation. Mosquitoes, malaria, yellow fever, heat, humidity. She says, I've got a feeling. They're going to do something, they're going to find a way to get the air and, I don't know, condition it or do something, but make it where Florida you can live there year-round. But people are going to buy winter homes there. This place called Miami Beach. People are going to want to buy homes there. This is place Orlando. Something big is going to happen there. I almost imagine her saying, I see a giant rat. I'm going to make a lot of money for Orlando. It's going to make money. She owned like 60 pieces of property in Asheville, and on paper, she was the second or third wealthiest person in town. Mr. Vanderbilt and Mr. Grove, of course, a little bit ahead of her. But it was all tied up in real estate, mortgaged real estate. She would mortgage a piece to buy another piece, mortgage that. She mortgaged her own home. Real estate prices crashed. The Great Depression hit Asheville before it hit other places. The city had gone on an immense public works campaign. They built our beautiful city hall. They cut a tunnel through Bocature Mountain. They built a high school. They built a county building. They built a reservoir system big enough for a city of 1 million people. We got about 100,000 now. The city went bankrupt. Julia went bankrupt too. She lost her home. Luckily, a very kind Jewish businessman bought it and said you could live here rent-free the rest of your life. But she lived her life, and the tax collector got it in the end. The bill was right.
Talk about Fred living there toward the end of his life.
Yeah, Fred was the brother closest in age to him. He tried to maintain it as a museum and a boarding house. And it's more upkeep than one person could do, put it that way. So he tried to make a go of it, but he couldn't. Finally, he let the city of Asheville buy it for pennies on the dollar. He tried. Eventually the state took it over. Other questions?
Can you talk a little bit, Tom, about some of Wolfe's plays? You mentioned Welcome to Our City.
Yeah.
And it's a long play. I've taught it before here at UNC Asheville. I think it's quite a good play.
It is quite a good play.
And it's a very modernist play. But can you talk about how maybe in writing Welcome to Our City, Wolfe was perhaps unwittingly predicting things like gentrification and real estate collapse and, credit card millionaires and,
It's a play originally called, and it's a word I don't know usually use, but that's what he called it. Originally called Niggertown, because the central character is a black physician who owns the largest house in what's now called the Block, just the area just south of Pack Square. And the city fathers decided that that was prime real estate and that it was not, it should go to decent God-fearing people, not to people with dark skins. So they began to buy up and condemn and move out local residents. This one doctor refuses to sell. And that's the plot of the play. The city's machinations with the ministers, the religious community, the social, the civic community, the business community all come to him and say, you've got to sell. I mean, you just got shacks here. These are beautiful building sites. You built on top of hills. You can't keep this. And you're right, exactly prefiguring what happened in the 1960s and the 1970s. As you might know, there was a plan to turn downtown Asheville into one giant shopping mall. Places like the Grove Arcade, all of Haywood Street, most of the historic architecture were going to be leveled to build a shopping center to compete with the one that was opening out in East Asheville. Some very brilliant planners and a great philanthropist banded together, and they stretched crime scene tape around the area that's going to be torn down. And when people saw it, they said, they're going to tear down this building? That's a beautiful building. They're going to tear down this building? They're crazy. And so they dropped the plans. I like to say the reason we have such a beautiful downtown is, again, because of the poor planning of our city fathers in the 20s. Population was doubling every 5 years, and so they built this reservoir system for 1 million people. What can you do with good, clean water? You can make something from that out of that. The breweries of Sierra Nevada and New Belgium sent water samplers all over the East Coast. They wanted to open production facilities here. And they said, this is the best water east of the Rockies. Build your city. But again, the city, instead of defaulting, as many did, said, we're going to pay this off. This is a debt we took on. We plan to pay it. It wasn't paid back, I think, until 1973. Last penny was paid. As a result, there was no money to tear down all these old, ugly buildings downtown. That's why we have the best collection of Art Deco and architecture outside of Maine. Sometimes poor planning is better than no planning at all. Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes,
This is kind of going back to Mother, but since Tom's growing up experiences in the boarding house obviously affected his writing life,
Yeah.
how is it that she happened to be able to take him? if she didn't like her children, why did she take Tom, or why didn't he stay with the rest of the family?
That's a good question. I think the notion is that once you're a mother, that becomes your role. And if you have 8 children, you become a mother. But she didn't want to lose that last connection to her family. That's the only explanation I could think. He hated it there. As often as he could, he would flee to the home estate, and she'd have to go down there and drag him back home and say, "You're sleeping here tonight." So he wanted to keep him a boy as long as he could, and she didn't want him to go away. At one point, he says, when he's going to college, he says, "I'm going." He said, "Where are you going?" He said, "You weren't looking, were you? I've already gone." They just fought. Back here.
You mentioned that perhaps Thomas Wolfe and was it Ben might have been on the spectrum. What kind of what leads you to that conclusion?
What people said about him, that they both had a terrible stutter. Tom, if you were in a room with him, he would be in the corner like this, watching everything, but saying nothing. I get the notion that as a boy, as a teenager, he had his little notebook. He was watching all of these people and saying, "I'm going to write about this someday. I'm going to write this someday." That he was just not very popular. That he, in part because he went to school too young. His sister went to school in the 1st grade. He was only 4. He tagged along with her and they enrolled him. They didn't check IDs, apparently, back in that day. So he was considerably younger, but he was considerably taller, awkward, gangly, and didn't feel at home in his body. He wrote standing up in a waist-high refrigerator. He said, "I've never found a chair that I could sit in that was comfortable." So I get the feeling, really, he felt like he was an alien on this planet. He didn't really belong anywhere. When you read his work, there's always this wanting to fit in, wanting to make friends. Ben was like that too. Yeah, Ben was a newspaper reporter and himself a form of writing. And he would basically tell Tom that you and I are different. We're interested in ideas. We're interested in reading and not thinking. This town is not for us. Questions? Going once. Going twice. It's never gone. I'll stick around for you. Thanks for coming out tonight.
I want to say hello and thanks for your talk. And I wanted to say to you, I went to college.
Did you?
And what year were you there?
I was 63, 67.
Yeah, last time.
What
I
college?
was in Will Rice.
I was in Baker.
In Baker. Yeah, and I was there from, I came there in the fall of '63.
Me too.
And I graduated in '68 and I took off my senior